chair of the ACSD board, and I welcome everyone coming out this evening to our annual meeting. So I'm going to basically kick off the meeting, call it order, and I'm going to act as moderator just for a little bit of time until we actually do the article, and then the new moderators will take over. So you only have to put up with me for a little while. So what I'd like to do is read the warning. It says, the legal voters of the Addison Central School District are hereby warned to meet at the Middlebury Union High School in Middlebury, Vermont on Tuesday, February 27, 2024 at 7 p.m. to transact the following business. Article 1, to elect the following officers: A moderator, B, a treasurer, and C, a clerk. So, can I have a nomination for moderator?
Moderator.
Okay, a second?
Second.
Thank you. Chip, second. Any other nominations? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor of paying Jim Douglas as moderator, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? We have a moderator. I'll let you take over.
Barb says she's going to fade away, but I think we'll hear from her before the evening is over again, and we appreciate her leadership of our board of directors. Well, the next item on our warning is the election of the treasurer of the district. Is there a nomination for the office of district treasurer?
I'm nominating Michelle Warren.
Michelle Warren's nominated. Is there a second to that nomination?
A second.
Second. Any other nominations for the office of treasurer? If not, all in favor of electing Michelle Warren as treasurer, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it. We've re-elected Michelle as our treasurer. Thank you, Michelle, for doing the work for us. Next, we elect the clerk. Is there a nomination for the office of the clerk of our district?
I will nominate Mary Gill as ACSD board clerk.
Mary Gill is nominated to be clerk. Seconded. Other nominations for the office of clerk?
Don't see her.
Not. All in favor of electing Mary Gill as our clerk, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And this is a little out of order, but I want to thank our longtime retiring clerk, Linda Barrett, for her commitment. Do appreciate it. How many years? Thanks so much for all you've done for us. Article 2, to elect a new ACSD at-large member for the Patricia Hannaford Career Center. Nomination for Director of the Career Center.
I nominate Lindsay Hescott.
Michelle nominates Lindsay Hescott for the position. Is there a second to that?
I'll second.
Other nominations for service on the Patricia Hannaford Career Center.
I'd like to nominate Michael Giorgio.
Michael Giorgio is nominated for the position. Is there a second to that nomination?
I'll second.
Are there other nominations for position of at-large member of the Career Center Board? Any other nominations? Not. Declare the nominations closed and proceed to take a ballot for the purpose of electing either Lindsay Hescott or Michael Giorgio. And for the clerk, why she's retiring, because she has a lot of work to do tonight. Distribute ballots, and they're pre-printed with something on them so that it won't be tempted to slip any other piece of paper in the box. It's the only voters of the district, they vote, so for any non-voters, you're on your honor to not take the ballot. Pause for just a moment while Linda and Michelle will go about that.
Yeah.
So, Lindsay Hescock, Hescock. Michael Giorgio, Giorgio. Giorgio. Or maybe this one's. Linda has the ballots, Michelle has pens. Need one.
Thank you.
Like a pen?
Am I allowed to say anything?
Well, we're in the middle of it.
Okay.
Thank you. Every voter of the district have a ballot, and only one. Michelle, we're going to elect your voting ballots and official ballot.
We just appointed one with Steve.
Does every voter cast a ballot, or wishes to do so? Everyone voted? Okay, then Linda will count the ballots.
So that would have been that where? 60 was so 64 would have been down to my I know I heard it before, but my roommate in college. Rabbit goals. It's different. It's a different.
Yeah.
He got his college.
During other.
Why? Think about it.
How are you doing, Steve?
So the only thing that really sad is explosive. Violence. I don't know. Pretty amazing. In Arizona. Yeah. But he's, yeah, he's a long time. Finish the books. The flowers. Not at all. It's a history.
Townwide, was it? Was there any sense of whether it's
It's the library.
That's what Claire said, but then there were all the lights down, or like the traffic lights were.
I don't know what the rules are.
Linda and Michelle have completed the counting of the ballot, so listen to the result of your vote. Lindsay has 13, Michael has 15. Congratulations, Mike, on being elected to represent the district on the Hannaford Community. Article 3, to hear and act upon the reports of the school district officers. Later, we'll have a public information hearing on the proposed budget, but are there any other officers of the district who want to report on their activities or offer any comments at this point? We'll proceed to Article 4, to see if the voters of the Addison Central School District will vote to authorize its board of directors under 16 DSA Section 562(9) to borrow money by issuance of bonds or notes not in excess of anticipated revenue for the school year. What's your pleasure regarding Article 4?
So moved.
Move adoption of Article 4, is there a second? Seconded. Any discussion on Article 4? Not, are you ready for that question? If so, all in favor of adopting Article 4, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and adopted Article 4. Article 5, to do any other business proper to come before said meeting.
Well, go ahead.
I
Rosemary?
make a motion that in the future, since this is a 6-town district, that the nominating committee give us a list of the names and that they are willing to serve before the next meeting.
For,
The nominating committee for officers. You've got a whole group of officers that were off the floor, and I think it's appropriate with the number of towns involved that they feel it.
the board will take that under consideration. Thank you.
Jim, that was a motion.
That was a
Was
motion.
that a motion?
That's a motion.
Yeah, it needs to be,
Is there a second?
Well, can't take binding action under other business, but we can certainly get a sense of the meeting if you like. All in favor of Rosemary's motion, which is to print the names of those who have been candidates for office in the annual report.
Yes.
In some cases, we might not know them, right?
Right.
From the floor, but you're thinking of the ones that are on the Australian ballot or?
No, I think that when you have a meeting like this, it's very nice to get nominations for the floor, but I think you also need to have a committee get together and decide if there's somebody, obviously, people who have worked in those positions before, if they're willing to work again, I think it's appropriate.
Sort of, well, we don't have a nominating committee now, right? So this would be to have a nominating committee to seek off candidates for the offices and determine their willingness to serve if elected.
Correct.
Wouldn't preclude any nominations.
No, not at all.
Everyone understand the motion that Rosemary's offered? Was there a second?
I'll second.
Any seconds?
James,
Chip?
I guess the school board doesn't determine these positions, however. So for us to have a nominating committee to nominate for moderator or treasurer, the community nominates for that. So I guess I'm a little confused. I understand what you're saying, but I also am a little confused as to how that would function if this isn't our role to nominate. We may nominate them as a member of the community, but we don't don't set it up before.
At
As far
least
as-
list them. I mean, I think that that's appropriate, to at least know who's there.
I think the matter is that it's not necessarily the board's role to determine who is on that list. It is the community's role to determine that. And some of the board members have put forth effort to try to find folks who might be interested in serving those roles. And that isn't often done in time to have it printed in the annual report. So I think that's the rub. I think that it's the full community's responsibility to bring forth nominations. I think it's okay for board members to do it, but to have the expectation that we have to create a committee to find people to serve that role when it's in fact the community's decision and not the board's decision, that's the rub, I think, is what I'm hearing from Chip.
Yeah, so listening, one option could be that a community committee is formed. And maybe there's a, if a board member wants to participate, that's great. That would maybe meet in the January timeframe, in time
Yeah.
for it to happen, so we could actually list them in the annual report. That would be a solution here.
Yeah, definitely.
So, we could solicit, if people are interested, maybe as the clerk, somehow could send out a request for members coming together and forming this committee. I'm just thinking out loud here.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
That might be an option. But I think, or if a community, like if you would like to kind of take lead on this, we'd love to have you help bring people together that are interested and maybe work with the newly elected clerk to do so. That would be great.
Which one, the way it plays to start for next year in the report, they have a current
Would be helpful.
treasurer, clerk, and such name and listed.
That would be very helpful.
Then
I think that's a great place to start.
we
Well, that we could do.
would let everyone know who's in the current position.
Yeah.
But if we put it in the report, then.
Any other discussion? We have Rosemary's motion to form a nominating committee and seek out candidates and determine their interest in serving for various district positions. Ready for the question?
So,
It's not a, you're saying it's not something.
Well, it wouldn't bind the board, but sometimes you get a sense of the meeting.
So maybe I'd make a motion to amend it to say for next year that we would definitely, put the names in that are current holders of the position. And then, in the future, I would start there, is maybe just start by putting the current holders of the positions. And if we know a position is going to be open, we could somehow indicate that in the write-up. Would that be maybe a first start and see how that goes? And then beyond that, in the next year or two, maybe we can form a nominating committee of community members. But I would suggest that I'd make a motion to amend. There was this, I heard a second.
Yeah, pointed out, this is all kind of informal anyway under other businesses, it's not a warrant article, but are you okay with that?
Surely, absolutely.
So maybe without any formal action, we can get a consensus of the meeting that the board will take the steps that Barb outlined for next year and see how that goes.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay.
You're up.
Okay. So I do have some other business here, and basically, serving on the board is hard work, and this year has been really hard between going through 2 superintendent search, an interim search, a strategic plan that we've finalized and approved, learning about new education systems with legislation that has been passed over the last couple of years. So at this time, one of our board members is not going to be running and decided to not run on this year, and that's Lindsay Hescock. So I would like to really take this time to thank Lindsay for her service and serving on the board the last 3 years. She joined with me back 3 years ago. And this year and previous years, she served on the policy committee, and the past year, she was also vice chair. So I thank you for that service. And I really admire her dedication and cannot even begin to imagine how hard it was to juggle life as a single mom, work and serving on the board, especially this year. So I just want to take this moment to once again, thank you so much for your service. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay, for your service. Yes, you get a certificate suitable for framing.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
We appreciate it. Brian?
Yes, I have a few things to bring up. If there's anybody out here who is not wondering why I came in most of the way through the meeting, it's because I spent basically the entire day with some of our outstanding high school boys and girls. Today and Friday is the state meet for the Nordic. And I am in my position as a board member, but also in my position as a school bus driver, believe it or not, I took them up there to Reichert. It was one of the hottest days I've ever been up there. The coach was saying to me, he hoped that the trails would stay enough so that they could compete. And as the day went on, you could see the snow, and then you saw the grass, and the conditions were such that it was slow. So you had to be well-trained, you had to have your technique. So I kept wondering, I said, how are we doing? I hyped up and I'm watching them. And one of the difficulties is if you ever go to one of these meets, trying to figure out who we are. Because the uniform, it only has a name on the white sock. So you're like this all the time and they're going by you. So anyway, what happened was at the end, like at 4 o'clock, they have their award ceremony. So I'm sitting there, I'm saying, I better get back to this meeting. So they get the award ceremony going. And I'm listening. And the upshot is this. Division 2, which is where we are, the girls are in first place. The boys are in second place. That's why I was late. I didn't want to come in the clothes that I was wearing, and I didn't get home until after 6 o'clock. So, I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't watching football. So, you should be very pleased. They're going to be up in Craftsbury on Friday, and I'm picking it up around 7 o'clock. It's a long, but they have the possibility of taking it, the whole state meet, and that's outstanding. It's something to tell other people about, that we have kids like that.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for your support for the program and letting us know on the success of our skiers. Thank you. Just wanted to, hear from them later, but I wanted to, on behalf of our district, thank Tim Williams for serving this year as our interim superintendent. She had another gig not far from here previous year. Is there something else we can recruit him for?
I don't think I don't think so.
Well, Tim, we really appreciate your providing leadership to two of our districts over the past couple of years. You've made a tremendous contribution to its success. Thank you. Is there any other business property come before the meeting? Before we transition to our information hearing on the budget? Any other business for the meeting itself? Not. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Move to adjourn, seconded. All in favor of adjourning the meeting, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the annual meeting is adjourned. The voters of the Addison Central School District are hereby warned to meet at the Middlebury Union High School in Middlebury, Vermont, on Tuesday, February 27, 2024, at 7 p.m. for a public information meeting to discuss Australian ballot articles warned for a vote on Tuesday, March 5th, 2024. That hearing will take place immediately following the adjournment of the annual meeting of said Addison Central School District. And I have the March 5th warning in front of me. Is there anything in addition to the budget that is on the Australian ballot election laws? No other articles?
There are 3 articles.
Oh, there we go. They are as follows. Shall the voters of the Addison Central School District vote to authorize the ACSD School Board to expend $50,604,080, which represents a 6.5% increase in total spending, and is the amount the ACSD School Board has determined to be necessary for the ensuing fiscal year. Secondly, shall the voters of the Addison Central School District vote to authorize the ACSD School Board to appropriate $2,033,842 of the FY 2023 unassigned fund balance to the ACSD Capital Reserve Fund. And then the third article is to elect 4 school directors whose names will be on the ballot, 1 from Cornwall, 2 from Middlebury, and 1 from Shoreham, all for 3-year terms. So I assume in the budget presentation, we'll talk about both the proposed budget itself and the use of the unassigned fund balance. Hear about both of the articles.
I have a question, how do we get to a 6.5% when there's supposed to be a 5%?
Well, we'll get to that. Why don't we invite Barb to kick off this discussion, and then the superintendent and business manager will talk about some of those specifics and respond to your questions.
Good evening again. I'll keep my words short, and then I'll turn it over to the interim superintendent, Dr. Williams, and our business manager, Matthew. But what I'd like to share is, I can say without a doubt that this has been a very challenging budget creation year. In the time I've been on the board, this has been the most challenging. ACSD's proposed fiscal year 25 budget has been developed to preserve stability while meeting the needs of our students during our leadership transition, and responds to several financial drivers, each of which has significant impacts on next year's finances. At the forefront, the Vermont legislature enacted Act 127 in 2022 to improve student equity across the state of Vermont by adjusting the school funding formula. And I quote from the legislation is designed to ensure that the financial resources available to local school districts for educating students living in poverty, English learners, students in small rural schools, students in sparsely populated school districts, and students in middle and high schools are sufficient to meet the cost of educating these students. As a result of Act 27, ACSD will be seeing a 13% reduction in its share of the state education fund for fiscal year 25. Besides responding to the impacts of Act 127, the budget also responds to several other factors, including the expiration of federal ESSER funding for next year, another year of double-digit healthcare premium cost increases, anticipated wage increases due to contract negotiations, and a decline in non-tuition student enrollment. Undoubtedly, the next several years will be challenging as the board works with our new superintendent, Dr. Baker, to address the long-term impacts of Act 127. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Williams.
Good evening, everyone. To answer your question, do the best we can. Act 127 is a challenge for all districts in Vermont this year. And mostly because all districts in Vermont and everywhere in the country had an infusion of federal monies in the form of ESSER. Those monies are now gone. So we have to contend with that issue as we move forward. This budget and next year's budget, and one after that, and one after that. It's quite a challenge to no longer have an influx of several $1 million in your budget to try to keep things going the way that you had to keep them going. Act 127 was put in place as a noble attempt, and I do mean that, a very noble attempt to provide equitable funding for students in Vermont. As they crafted that legislation, they had not realized what impact the one mechanism in that legislation was going to have on the overall school spending in the state. So as part of the legislation, they initially had something called a 5% cap that you had to qualify for by keeping your spending to a certain level. And to keep our spending at that certain level, required us to make some cuts in the budget. There are some things out of our budget that we have this year that we're not going to have next year. So to qualify for that 5% cap, we had to make some cuts to get there. During this time, the state legislature realized that they didn't have the funding they needed to maintain school systems in Vermont the way they intended. As I mentioned before, this was very well-intentioned legislation. As is often the problem, the devil is in the details. And the details didn't allow the state to have enough funding to keep Act 127 in its state at that time. So I think it was last week, if I recall correctly, they amended the legislation, and we knew that was coming. We had a pretty good idea how they were going to amend that legislation. So we looked at what we had done to qualify for the 5% cap under Act 127 and realized, not at first, but then when we looked at it very carefully, we realized that the cuts that we had made were appropriate for the budget to meet pass muster for the revisions to Act 127. So some school districts had to go back and redo their budgets and re-advertise them and have an approval process later than what we're doing here now. But because of the actions we took to qualify for the 5% cap, we did not have to do that whole process and have to ask you to vote on this budget later on. So we're able to maintain the timeline because of what we've done early on. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Matt so he can share with you the details of the budget that we're proposing.
This far away from the screen, so I might grab the mic and walk around a little bit, but
Put the mic right up close though, please.
Yeah.
You gotta be closer, Matt.
big speaker. This presentation that we're going to give you all tonight is sort of a culmination of the budget development process that started all the way back in the fall. For anyone who's following along at home, watching all the presentations that you've given to the school board over the course of the year so far. We start with the big picture, what the budget budget drivers, it's the environment that we're working in. And we get all the way down to the nitty-gritty, budget details and the culmination of tax rates. This presentation is meant to summarize all that work and not replicate it. Otherwise, we'll be here all night, and you have better things to do than listen to me. But this is really the highlight reel of the entire budget development process, with an emphasis on that landing spot, which is our equalized district tax rate, the marriage of the school budget to the local taxpayer. We're going to go through some slides and then stop for questions at the end. Just as a matter of procedure, because of the way this meeting is warned, we will not be able to take questions for anyone who's watching online. So like I was saying, budget drivers are sort of the environment that we're working in. Dr. Williams alluded to several, as well as Barb. For FY25, Act 127 is our biggest budget driver, and that's the loss of tax capacity. What does that mean? In order to think about it, we have to think about our relative share of the state ed fund, which is the state fund that pays for all the school budgets. Because of the new weights that Act 127 put into place, some districts, or all districts, have their share of the pie change from last year to this year. The measure of that change is the effect of Act 127 on each school district. So many districts were advantaged by the change and gained tax capacity. A similar number were disadvantaged by the new weights and lost tax capacity. As Barb said, ACSD lost 13% tax capacity, which put us in the bottom 6 of the state. Okay. Other major drivers include healthcare, which is a statewide driver, 16.4% increase in healthcare costs. We're also negotiating both teacher and support staff contracts right now, and so salary, new salary money was a big driver for FY25. We also had those ESSER positions that had previously been funded through that emergency grant from the pandemic. The money went away, the need for those positions remained. So trying to make a plan for how to bring forward whatever ESSER positions we could to maintain continuity and the services that those folks provided. And then a decrease in this crazy acronym that we're going to talk about, we have LTWADM, which is sort of our pupil count. It's a weighted long-term average pupil count, which is what the state under Act 127 now uses to count pupils. And ours went down about 1.5%. That largely correlates to a small loss in enrollment. So you can see here, this chart shows the relative strength of each one of those drivers. With Act 127 and the property yields really being the biggest factor, but you can see there are several other factors at play. Under Act 127, it would have cost $2.5 million more to fund the exact same budget as we have this year. It's another good way to think of it. So without spending a single dollar more than we spent this year, it would have cost $2.5 million more because of that disadvantage in tax capacity. We've talked about ESSER positions. I think it's important to take a close look at some of the positions that were cut or restructured in order to save money in the FY25 budget, and then which ones we were able to maintain in the spending plan. We have behavioral interventionists, team of climate culture, basic harassment and bullying coordinator, and a 0.5 monthly liaison that were all either eliminated or restructured. What does restructured mean? In the case of the behavioral interventionist, for example, transition to a different position that's more in line with the similar job descriptions in other schools. And in the case of the multiple liaison, a move from employments to contract services. And in the case of the dean and the coordinator position, elimination of that role. What were maintained were largely the positions that supported students. And that's where we were bringing forward academic interventionists, prevention specialists, classroom teacher, curriculum coordinator, and Inspire program coordinator, which is one of our flexible pathways that provides options to students at the school. Next, we're going to talk about strategies. Like, what's the big picture strategy that guided our development of this budget? There are three. So the first was level services, right? This was the idea behind those ESSER decisions. How do we maintain the essential student services which originated under the pandemic and bring them forward to say that work's not done yet? We need those folks to stick around. The second is a smooth transition. How do we maximize the continuity of the transition in the superintendency between Dr. Williams' interim role this year, Dr. Burrow's 10-year superintendency, Dr. Baker's pending superintendency. How do we create the most continuity and consistency through that otherwise choppy time where we're having turnover at the highest level of leadership in the district? We want to make sure that we have solid ground for our leaders to speak. And then tax mitigation, right? I mean, whether it was the 5% property tax cap or the ensuing discount, which was the mechanism that the state has now switched over to, it was really important to constrain this budget so that we prevented a runaway tax rate from occurring. And we throughout the process targeted the benchmark increase of 5%. That was originally the capped rate, but even once the cap was repealed last week, our new strategy, as we'll see, is to hopefully land right back in that neighborhood. Another major theme, and again, we're summarizing here, right? There's a whole presentation on this yellow pyramid. But one of the biggest moves in the budget this year was a reorganization. It didn't necessarily represent a net influx of funds or expenses, but it was a reorganization for the sake of aligning our student services with our special education services. And this serves a few different purposes. It's a logic model, where we didn't have one before, so it just first and foremost organizes things. But it isolates supplemental resources from mandatory resources. That's a big change. We'll be able to now measure mandatory resources, those that are legally required in order to operate schools, from supplemental resources, which is what do we add on top of that for? What do we add on to give our students what we think they need? How do we measure that? So this really isolates need from enrollment-based mandate. And that reorganization is going to lay the groundwork for the implementation of our strategic plan, which has a strong emphasis on equity and all the work that's going to follow from that. So that was a major theme this year, just a reorganization within the budget of existing assets. Next, we're going to talk about the general fund, which is where most of our budget resides. There's a pie, the general fund. And the general fund is made up of 8 cost centers. Sorry, I've never counted. Did I get it right?
Yep.
12.
So you can see here, the biggest one, I'll read them off if if anyone in the back row didn't bring their glasses or binoculars. We have student instruction, regular education. So that is, again, that lower level of the pyramid that we just looked at. Direct instruction is the biggest slice of the pie here. The next biggest one in orange is student services and special education. So that represents the revised marriage of those two things. So there was some transfer from blue to orange, relative to their share of the general fund year to year. The other cost centers are central cost centers that support our schools and function in a centralized capacity. So we have universal pre-K, which is tuition that we pay pass-through basis to third-party preschool providers. We have our tuition that we pay to the Hanford Career Center. We have transportation, which is the contracted monies we pay to STA Budget, who provide our school bus services. We have our facilities and maintenance budget, which handles all of the facilities and maintenance work that we do for our 9 school buildings and 2 additional facilities at 49 and 208 Charles Ave. We have our tech and IT department, which allows all of this to be possible, keeps the Wi-Fi going, and sets all of our students up with all the tech and computer needs that they have. And then we have the school board and district administration cost center, which handles the central offices, the contingency, district-wide legal fees, workers' comp, other insurances, the fiscal team, sort of the nuts and bolts of operating the mechanism. If we were to take that general fund and look at what's going to change next year, this is what this chart does. Call this the pencil eraser. All right, so FY24 general fund on the left, FY25 general fund on the right. The FY25 general fund starts with the same basis, right? So we're starting at the same basis. That's that big blue column. And then all of the changes to get from the FY24 general fund to the FY25 general fund are in that top section, the eraser. We're going to zoom in on that so that you can see what it's made up out of. So if we start, I think the easiest way to look at this chart is to start from the bottom, start from blue, go to orange. You'll see there, orange and gray represent salary and benefits. So those are our 2 biggest increases to the general fund year to year. They represent the fact that our district, like many other districts, is committed to paying people and taking care of the people who run the show here. So that salary and benefits increase is the lion's share. The other ones are a little bit harder to see. We've got contracted services, supplies and materials, fees and dues, energy and utility costs, maintenance costs, tuition obligations, and then forecast transportation costs. All playing a much smaller role in year-to-year increase. The next section that we're going to talk about is the formation of an equalized district tax rate, which is the only tax rate that the district has a direct control over. It's, like I said in the beginning of the presentation, the sort of interface between the school budget and the taxpayer. The first thing that we need for an ingredient in the EDTR is the local spending amount. To calculate that, we take all of our expenses, which, if you remember, that general fund is less than that 50 million. That 50 million represents every single expense that we have, including those that are covered by federal, state, and other grants. And this is all of the expenses minus all of the revenues, which offset many of those grant expenses. Expenses minus revenues, what's left is our ed spending. This is what the state ed fund is required to provide to fund the school budget. How does the state ed fund get that? That's raised through property taxes. So property taxes in our district are set forth to raise that $40 million mark. The property tax is not the only revenue that the state ed fund uses. It's both homestead and non-homestead property tax, less income-based tax credits for people who are income qualified. But then we also have revenue come into the ed fund from sales and use tax, meals tax, Medicaid, and a few other small revenue sources. Education spending per equalized weighted pupil is the basis for the district tax rate. On the next slide, we're going to look at what an equalized weighted pupil is. All right. I'll go through this for the fine print. This is a breakdown of what LTWADN is and what it's made up out of. This is our long-term weighted average daily membership. This is how we get there. This is the new weight enacted on March 27. This is how it breaks down. So the first thing that goes into LTWADN is long-term average daily membership. This is a average enrollment from the current and previous years, so 2-year average, plus any state-placed students. Each one of those enrolled students, again, it's a 2-year average, counts as one. And they kind of form the basis. The next thing we do is we add enrollment weight. So this is a function of preschool kids cost less than an elementary school kid. Middle school kids cost a little bit more, high school kids cost a little bit more than that. So it's a grade level weighting. You can see there that for pre-K, we take that original 1 that we assigned and reduce it by 0.54. So a preschool kid is actually 0.46 of weight. K through 5, 0 additional weight. 6 through 8, 0.36 additional weight. 9 through 12, 0.39 additional weight. So we calculated that based on how many preschool, middle school, high school kids we have, and add that weight on next. After that, we have FPL and ELL. Those are acronyms that stand for Federal Poverty Level and English Language Learners. These are 2 new weights this year, or sorry, not new, but newly calibrated weights. For every student who is at or below 180% of the federal poverty line, we had an additional 1.03 on top of their original 1. So now they're worth 2.03 of weight. For every student who is an English language learner, we had 2.49 of weight on top of the original 1. So an English language learner student would be a total of 3.49. Next category of weights is meant to provide equity of resource allocation to students who are living in sparsely populated districts and who are going to school in small schools. Now, the way that the sparsity weight is set up, there are 3 gates. There's a low sparsity gate, a medium sparsity gate, and a high sparsity gate. Or no sparsity gate, I guess that's 4. So if you're in a densely populated area like Burlington or like another city, you would not receive any sparsity weight. It's a measure of population density for the entire district. So for us, during the census, every single town in the district was measured and aggregated and averaged out. We were placed in a low sparsity band, which means that we're qualifying for an additional 0.07 per LTADM. So every one of our pupils in that first column qualifies for an extra 0.07 weight. If we had been in the middle tier or high tier sparsity, we would have qualified for small schools weight, which is an additional 0.2 for every student who attends a school with fewer than 100 enrollment. But we didn't list that here because that's not a weight that we qualified for. So if you take that row of bottom colored columns and add them all together, you get our LTW ADM for this year, the sum of all of those weights. For us this year, it's 2,487.15. Remember at the beginning when I said we had a slight decrease in enrollment, that's that 1.5% decline that you're seeing there, largely the factor of just having a few fewer kids in school. This chart compares our ingredients that go into the equalized district tax rate. Once again, so we have our education spending, we have our LTW 80, and the state did sort of retro calculate what it would have been in FY24 for the basis of comparison. But if you recall, we used equalized pupils last year, not LTW ADM, so this is just for the sake of comparison. But we would have had 2,525 LTW ADMs instead of that 2,487. We divide our ed spending by our equalized weighted pupils to get a spending per pupil figure. That's at $16,099 per pupil. For anyone who is tracking the 5% property tax cap, this is where we needed to stay below 10% to maintain the 5% cap protection under the old legislation. And so we were careful to steer our spending to a 9.9% increase, despite all the drivers that we were trying to reckon with. That 9.9% was an intentional move to not hit 10, and therefore to protect the taxpayer from losing that 5% property tax. The next thing that we do is use the property yield to determine the equalized district tax rate. Well, the property yield is the state's measure of the value of the first dollar of taxes. It is in a year where real estate prices have increased across the state and everything is worth more, generally a very high yield. But it is also made lower by new spending pressures in the ed fund. And this year, these drivers that we're dealing with, everyone's dealing with, and there's been a tremendous load of new spending on the ed fund, which has kept the yield sort of dampened or tamped down. We've been tracking the yield really closely because it becomes the main variable in determining our equalized district tax rate as we head towards the finalized frozen yield, which is going to happen after all the school budgets are approved. So we do know with a fair measure of confidence the area where we expect the yield to land. We've put the range in there, 97.75 to 10,000. This represents between 35 and 38% decline, which again is largely because with those new weights, the state pumped a lot more equalized pupils into the calculation and sort of diluted the yield a little bit. So the most important thing is that as we approach a $10,000 yield, our equalized district tax rate gets back to $1.47, which is the exact same as if it had been capped at 5%. At 97.75, which is where one of the most recent projections places it, our tax rate, equalized district tax rate would come in at $1.52. So that gives us this 5 to 8% range where we expect the EDTR to land in. Again, we're tracking the yield as a way to gain mark there. This chart summarizes some of the history of the yield over the course of this year. The first glance that we get at it is on the December 1st letter from the tax commissioner, who sets a preliminary yield based off of their analysis of the prevailing conditions. And that came in at that first data point, which you can see is, I think, 94,000, 9452 maybe. Can't remember off the top of my head. But over the course of the budget development season, the yield continued to decline. That low point on the chart that you see here represents the yield bottoming out in the 7,000 range, 7,200, which is when the state realized that it wasn't going to have the ability to raise enough money to pay for all the school budgets using the 5% cap mechanism. It was simply going to tax that fund too much, and that they needed to re-legislate at the last minute. So that was the bottoming out. You can see the date there, right around beginning of the month. As soon as that cap was repealed, it jumped back up. Why did it jump back up? Because several districts who had been taking advantage of the property tax cap were now not eligible, because they were districts that were advantaged in their tax capacity and therefore deemed to not be eligible for any kind of cap or discount. So that unweighted the yield dramatically, brought it right back up to under the 10,000 mark, which you can see there. The state has since produced 4, maybe 5 different yield projections. They're trying to do this on a regular basis to give districts the most up-to-date information that they can. But you can see that the data points are a little scattered and hard to predict. But they do kind of hover right around that zone that we use for our projections. So as the yield increases, tax rates will decrease. And we've got that 97.75. Oh, we did see 10,188 as one of the high water marks from the state's projections. That would bring us into $1.45, which again is a 3.6% increase. And that 3.6 to 8.4 range is really where we feel comfortable saying that things are going this year. Once we have an EDTR, that district tax rate is applied to each town and sort of enhanced by each town's CLA. CLA is an acronym that stands for Common Level of Appraisal. This is a mechanism that's used to ensure that the taxes that a town pays are, they say that every town pays their fair share. What does that mean? It means that, that the market value of a town's town's properties tends to outpace the assessed value. In case that market value outpaces assessed value, the CLA drops, which amplifies the district tax rate, and results in a higher town tax rate. Why is that? Because the properties are now worth more than the assessed value. Again, properties are worth more than the assessed value. That's usually a sign that the yield is going to come up because everything's worth more in the state, but that didn't happen. So we are seeing a decrease in CLA for each of our towns this year. Cornwall experienced the biggest decrease. Virginia had the smallest, Virginia Denver had the smallest. Relative year-to-year decreases. What does this mean? It's the culmination of 3 years of drastic increases in home sale price. Everyone who owns a home has probably paid some attention to what it might sell for these days. Things have gone up dramatically over the last 3 years. So a lot of these CLAs are coming in low to signal a need for reappraisal and the fact that assessed values have been outpaced by market values. In this example, we're using our $1.47 EDTR, which is what we would have brought in with the cap, and where we hope to land the discounts. If we apply those CLAs to each of the towns, using that EDTR, you can see here what the projected town tax rates would be, and what the year-to-year comparison would be with the town tax rates from FY24. So again, in this example, we're using, one of the most optimistic EDTRs that we could end up with. We're seeing still some pretty high dramatic changes in tax rates at the town level this year.
Especially in the smaller towns.
The other thing is that sometimes when looking at town tax rates relative to each other, your brain wants to draw conclusions of this town versus that town, or why here and not there, or those, a lot of that is sort of human nature. And I think that it's really important to remember that this is really only a byproduct of real estate sales relative to when a town's last assessment was. And each town is on their own track. There is no there's no comparison to be made there, town to town. The last thing to talk about before we take some questions is our reserve funds. We have two of them now. So we have an ed reserve and a capital reserve. Our education reserves are projected to have an end of the year balance of $2,333,262. Our capital reserves have a projected end of year balance of $1,520,974, which is the amount of fund balance that was transferred there this year from FY22. And then we also have an FY23 fund balance, which has not come in from the auditors yet, but is preliminarily set at $2,032,842,833,842. We have proposed appropriation of those funds to the capital reserves. Again, in the grand scheme of things, the school district is looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in deferred maintenance and moving reserves to some capital projects, moving fund balance to capital reserves is a way to prepare for the massive sort of facilities master planning process and potential bond initiative that are coming down the pipeline. That's it for fund balance. We do have some questions, and if anyone wants to take a look at spreadsheets, we have the general fund summary page here. All of our materials, including each one of the budget development presentations and FY25 budget book, is available on the website. We also have a few printed out here today, it's like one left, as well as a full page summary of the budget for anyone who wants the cliff notes. Happy to chat further about resources if anyone has questions.
Questions?
Matt, I didn't hear it clearly, and maybe you stated it, but when the legislature just recently in the last week replaced the 5% cap, which was an incentive which turned out to have dire consequences, they did replace it for those districts that were affected negatively. Could you talk about, because I don't think you really mentioned that 13%.
So districts that were negatively affected, meaning their share of the pie got smaller year to year, were deemed eligible for a tax rate discount. So the cap went away for everybody, no new cap. The discount now was applied to everybody who was disadvantaged. However, the state wanted to recognize that there was inequity of disadvantage. Some districts lost 30% or more of their tax capacity, and some lost 1%. And so they created a discount, which is equal to a 1 cent discount per percent disadvantage. So our pie is 13% smaller, which means that we have a 13-cent discount. Now, the original 5% property tax cap was meant to be a tapering mechanism where each year property taxes would go up 5%, 5%, 5% for 5 years until either you went through all 5 years or your budget, your actual cost of your budget, the subsequent tax rate matched what your district tax rate was. So you didn't need the cushion anymore. So in each one of these mechanisms, the states and well has been to lessen the pain felt by disadvantaged districts, while also creating an off-ramp or an equalization ramp so that actual tax rates can be brought in line with district tax rates. And by 2030, things will be leveled out is the goal. So with a new mechanism, which they call the transition mechanism, that discount would taper by 20% a year. So a 13-cent discount for FY25, based on the rounding rules that they have, it would go to 10 cents for FY26, and then down by 20% a year from there.
Governor, can I say one other thing, please, just in comment? Any of us that have sat through budget meetings for schools for the last 50 years, which I have, realize that this whole process has become incomprehensible, okay? And if you're not confused, then I don't know how you cannot be confused, honestly. It's become markedly more complicated, and it's become markedly less linear, meaning you take a budget, you have it in, and you vote on that amount, and people either accept it or not, and then you argue about it as to whether you're going to reduce that bulldozer or you're going to add that teacher or something of that nature. This just takes away all of that kind of discussion, and it makes it really difficult, even for those of us that sit through these all the time and have dealt with it, to try to figure it out. So I make that point only because the world of saying, I want to cut this amount and that will reduce your tax rate doesn't mean anything in this argument. We could cut out lots and lots of things from this budget, and it wouldn't change what your taxes are going to be. My taxes are going to be in any significant amount. So that's the part that's very difficult to talk to people about, to explain, to understand, even amongst all of us that are, 6 months of this at this point. So I thank Matt for putting together this as best he can to explain it. But if you're confused, I don't expect you wouldn't be.
I have a question about the numbers on the small handout. So the FY25 general fund is listed as 46.875 million. And the amount in Article 1, which is not state general fund, is 50,000.604 million. So what's the difference between the general fund and then what's listed in Article 1?
Good question. So the difference between the general fund and Article 1 is the expenditures which are not funded through state expenditures or state revenue. So anything that comes from federal grants, state grants, some of our other grants that we receive does not get counted towards that general fund. Expense. And so when we're showing expense, we're showing all 50 million. Much of the difference between the general fund and that 50 million are those offsetting federal grants and other grants.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I think what I tell folks is kind of like what's warned is the total budget that includes all of those monies. And the general fund is what we are asking our local taxpayers to fund. Does that make sense?
I thought I was confusing with the story. So actually, last year, warning, in statutorily, you're allowed to pick either one. Either just the general fund, you can put all of it. And last year, we could put just the general fund because we felt like that told a better story of the year-to-year budget. Whereas if we had included the ESSER grants last year, we made all the numbers look out of whack. And I think that led to some confusion for me when it came time to report things to the state. And I think that over the course of this last year, what I learned is, for the sake of reporting things to the state of Vermont, what they like to see is all of the expenses minus all of the revenues. Don't pick and choose what you report, or when you report one thing and when you report another, just always all of it. So we kind of switched back to that second option this year.
What's the projection for the students for the next 4 years? Population, obviously, went down.
Projected in we don't have that slide here today, but I think that if you were to look in the back of the budget book, there might be an appendix, a graph that shows that chart. You can also make that known.
It's starting to go down. It's still continuing.
Well, it's been on a decline for some, probably since,
20 years.
yeah, 20 years more, but I think from the modeling that I've seen, that we're leveling out.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we did see about 1.5% of decline in enrollment this year, but I don't think that forecast plays out.
No. And that was the long-term, I forget the acronym, the weighted long-term average, which if you lose a couple high school students, they weight at 1.39. So that makes a big difference on that weighted average. So I know both Tim and I, we had John Foster did an article in the paper, and we've done some analysis. And if you look at the projections, our schools have pretty stabilized. There was a little bit of decline the last couple of years still at the high school level. And we've made up for it with tuition students. So the actual number of kids there have been pretty level, but they don't go into this weight because we get tuition, which also then comes off of that number that you were talking, Ellen, because that's money that we get in. So, the numbers might even go up a little bit, right? And then, of course, Middlebury, you have a new housing development happening, so that's going to have some impact as well. But I think the drastic decline that we saw over the last many years has really stabilized when you look at the data, and even when you look at the elementary level over the last several years, like as a total, it's been pretty level. It hasn't been continuing to decline. And we did have a few larger grades at the high school still that we lost over the last few years, which, this average isn't next year's number. It's, as Matt said, it was this year and the previous year, it's an average, and then all the weights added on top of it. So it takes a while to adjust to it.
Page 31 of the budget book is the start of the enrollment projection section.
Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing. Page 31.
Well, I was just going to
3:30.
say, I mean, in terms of your question about enrollment, it sort of depends on how much you've sort of zoomed in on the graph or panned out from the graph, right? Like if you're looking at, the past 3 years, there's not been a whole lot of fluctuation, but if you've panned out and you've looked at the trend over the last 10 or the last whatever, you can just see where we're at in terms of our enrollment and what we have to grapple with, I think, as a district, is when we're looking at how to address some of our facilities that are in disrepair and make decisions about making sure that we distribute our resources to students that have need. We really have to take a look at the whole picture, from a broader perspective as well, and think about, where we're investing our resources and whether the configuration that we have continues to serve our current student population the way we want to serve our student population. So I think.
I'm looking for a projection down the road. I think that it's appropriate, again, where you spend your money.
Yeah.
Hopefully, a place where you're going to get the best results over the
Totally.
next 5 years.
Totally.
That's all I'm saying.
This,
Well, just to your point, that page, on page 31,
Again, so something about what is the line, Suzanne?
This suggests that the district should be in the early stages of preparation to accommodate up to 100 new students by the end of the decade. So that's like a 5-year out projection for adding 100 students.
And you believe that's going to happen because of the new building?
I did not write this sentence. I don't understand.
I'm just wondering where that number came from.
It's from enrollment and projecting it out, right? And ironic, like if you look at Cornwall, it had 90-some kids this year. So there has been, families that have moved to the district. Which has helped kind of stabilize.
It also, for the next 5 years, we do have the birth rates that we looked at. So there are kids that are are already born that will be entering pre-K and kindergarten when they turn 5. And we already know what those birth rates were in Madison County, and those were looked at and considered in those numbers.
And it's an estimate, right?
Yeah.
It's a projection.
Exactly, and I think the other thing that's just important to consider is, again, when you pan out and you look at the footprint of our district and the schools and the capacity that they used to hold, and the number of students that used to be served by our facilities in our schools compared to the number of students that are currently served, or even that will be served in the next 5 years.
50 years ago.
Right.
It was a much larger population.
Exactly. Exactly. So I think that's
But
part of the bigger
$5 million to pay for it.
picture that we need to consider when we're looking at how to serve this total student population in our
It's fine,
district.
I just asked you the question.
Yeah.
Good question.
It's an important question.
So Laura Cervely, Middlebury resident, and could you go back to the pie chart that shows the distribution?
Of expenses or
On the very
budget
first
drivers?
chart.
The pie chart that shows the distribution?
Right there.
That one?
Next one.
No, not that
No,
one.
of the extent of the cost centers.
This one?
That one. Okay, so I appreciated this chart. I appreciated what Chip said about the complexity. And I wonder, just what your hard conversations were about dividing the pie within the constraints that you had. And so what we see here is a big wedge for school board and district administration. And what we know is that we have a lot of kids that are struggling. And it would help us to understand what's happening at the district level to address that.
Special needs.
Special needs. And if you could speak to that.
So all of the special needs for our students are budgeted in student services and special education budget.
I see that.
The questions about the administration and the.
But what's happening there, I guess it would just be helpful,
Within the student services budget?
maybe.
So within the student services budget, we have all of our tier 2 and tier 3 personnel who handle special education, which is, on an individual education plan basis, student by student basis. And we also have our student services, which provide everything from nursing, mental health support to academic intervention and learning support.
Does that include the people who are outside the building who have special programs? In other words, we've had students who don't go into the classroom every day, they have a specialized program.
Yes.
Whatever you call it, there's a new name for it every week, so.
All the
The
ancillary
ACT.
programs.
Ancillary.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's in that wage.
Correct.
Is the Aspire program in that?
Yeah.
Yes.
Correct.
What's the Aspire program?
Aspire program is a program at the high school, which is a flexible pathway for students who can't be in class for some of the day, but can be in class for other times of the day. The Aspire program is can't be in one class.
They have more hands-on learning too, they're actually usually doing a project because they learn that.
The expert is sitting right here.
Well,
I'm kind of looking at her.
Having had children in the school program, I can say it works well for some of the program to have children who they can tolerate only so much classroom time before they turn on. So much better to have them in a program where they actually do hands-on, or they actually do a program. We want to have kids who have skills as well as being the pre-med, pre-college kids. We have kids who do well. You put them in a program where they can actually perform. Maybe they build a boat, or maybe they do a project that they can feel accomplishment, and they're working alongside of it. In their math, it's included in that program, and their English, because they write a report, is included in that program, and they perform much better. It's a good program. I'm not criticizing it.
I guess I just want to follow up and see if maybe you can clarify too, the sort of red part of the pie, which I think you were referring to. Correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding, and if I'm wrong, I'll feel a little sheepish about this, but part of that component does include coordinator positions that provide for our curriculum, our coordinated curriculum. Is that correct? Or is that part of the red portion, or are those positions
School board and
living?
district administration.
Are they living in?
District administration does not have
Curriculum coordinators is in the blue.
It would be in the PD curriculum.
Which is the gray one next.
Oh, the gray one, I'm sorry. Okay.
Gray one is professional.
Oh, gotcha.
So two of the pie wedges, just on this chart, are not labeled. The 1 million, the 1 million, that's professional development and curriculum, and the 172,000 is debt service.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you for clarifying.
Also, school board doesn't just mean our stipends, okay?
Right.
School board means all of the insurance and a lot of the things which goes into underneath the school system, whether it's property insurance, whether it's liability insurance, whether it's all the other things that we have to
District-wide
have.
contingency fund.
Contingency fund is also, the number, it's a 1% that is usually put in there. So that comes into that also. So those things are relatively, I'm not sure they're fixed, you always can change them, but they're fairly consistent as we go through years, except for increases in insurance, or as the budget goes up, the contingency number has gone up. But we've carried a pretty low contingency number over the years, 1% out of That is very low for most organizations.
Okay, that's very helpful. So the coordinator positions are not in that burgundy wedge.
They're not in the red list. They're little gray. Okay. Thank you.
And so that burgundy wedge is like what you were just saying, community and stuff like that. So not the district staff, so is.
It is, it's
Yeah.
some of that,
Some-
both of those things, yeah.
So if you go to page 55 on the budget book, it gives you a breakdown of that particular cost center with all the personnel and the positions.
Okay.
It's complicated.
Thank you. It's a great question
It's a good
though.
question.
It's a,
Other questions for?
Act 127 did a lot of things, equity. Two things they did in terms of revenue was one specifically in terms of the students who qualify as English language learners. They valued them at, I think it was almost 2.5 times what another student was. One other thing that they did was that they allocated to, I think it was the districts that have a certain number of English language learners, they gave an additional set of money. So for us, I think it was over $50,000.
50,000.
So here's my question. We get that money because these students qualify as English language learners. And as far as I can tell in this presentation, all this money gets like mixed together. So what services are we providing for them?
great question.
Apart from, I think maybe two positions. One is KC, who works for the district, who covers all 7 elementary schools, and then Ferdinand, who works Fernanda, who works the multilingual coordinator. What else are you doing?
That's a great question. I think that
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question involved ELL and the new weight assigned to English language learner students. The fact that the additional 1.5 of weight, or 2.5 of weight assigned to each ELL student, as well as the ELL grant, which for any district that has 25 or fewer ELL students gets a $50,000 grant as sort of this additional revenue. All of that is coming to us this year, and the question was, what is ACSD's plan for the new revenue or plan for programming around ELL in light of the new revenue stream generated by these students? I think that it's an exciting question because we've been asking ourselves, knowing that this is a new opportunity to sort of overhaul our ELL system, take it all apart, say, what's working, what else can we do, and know that the funding is now there to do a lot more. And I think that will probably be something that is part of the work for FY25, is to build into our plan, our budget plan, sort of overhaul the ELL program that we can then present in FY26 budget as now that we have this new thing, here's how we figured out how to use it. It's just sort of on a 1-year lag before it goes into the presentation, because it's not something that's sort of a cart work kind of thing, right?
So what are we doing now is, I guess, my question.
Now is the year to plan and to develop a strategy to implement the use of these new funds.
Now, we do have Spanish in one of the classes, right? How many years is Spanish? 1, 2, or 3?
This is different.
Well, Spanish were a big part of it. Remember where it's coming from. And our kids who worked on farms were Mexican oriented.
Years are all.
How many FTEs?
No, what do we currently?
Or, what are we programming?
For our ELL.
Yeah.
current ELL programming. I believe we have 2 ELL coordinator positions.
I don't want to coordinate, I want to know what's happening to the student.
2 ELL teachers, 1 vacancy, which will be rehired. Do you have any reason on?
Good 2.0 FTE multilingual learner teachers plus currently a multilingual learner liaison, Fernanda. And one of the FTE has resigned, and so there's a current opening posted on School Spring to fill the second 1.0 FTE. And what they do for our students is, in addition to the students' general education programming, they, the teachers work either individually or in small groups to give English language instruction to students for whom English isn't their mother tongue. And the amount of services each student gets depends on their proficiency level in English, which is based on ongoing testing that students receive all year long. It's locally designed and mandated by the state.
Thank you, Courtney.
Steve?
In addition, I would point you to the strategic plan for equity that we are getting ready to implement. Strategic plan for equity, and Dr. Baker is also going to be working with us. So this was a transition to try to keep things stable and level so that when she comes in, we can start working a little more focused on that equity piece. And so we're just trying to survive the storm this year budgetarily. And next year, the hope is that we'll be able to, when we have these resources at our fingertips, that we'll be able to implement a more comprehensive plan, especially addressing equity. So.
And you can find the strategic plan for equity on our website. If you go up on the very left menu item, if you click on it, it actually says strategic plan. And if you click on that, it's what we just approved in December. And it includes our goals as well as targets, really what success looks like. It's quite detailed. And what's currently happening right now is the administration team is doing a plan for implementing that strategic plan. So it's in work, right? It's going to be happening over the course of the next months. And Dr. Baker will be included in that discussion and help lead that. Does that help a little bit? But I definitely encourage you to go take a look at it. It's, I'd say, from all the strategic plans I've seen, it just has such a different focus than it has traditionally.
Questions for Matt on the budget?
Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Any other discussion on the budget? We traditionally invite candidates whose names are on the ballot next week to introduce themselves if they would like to. Not mandatory, but if you'd like to say hi, feel free to do so.
Well, I'm Mary Heather. I'm on the budget for reelection for a Middlebury position on the ACSD board.
I'm Barb Wilson, and I'm up for reelection as well. And I'm on, basically you vote for all of us and any of us. It's a district-wide vote. I happen to be, from Shoreham. And
I'm Ellen Whelan-Wiest. I'll be on the ballot representing Cornwall and the rest of the district.
And there's a new candidate, Laura
Hartson.
Yeah. And so it's uncontested, and she's she's running for the Middlebury seat that Lindsay is vacating because she's not running again. So there's four slots and 4 candidates.
Is it appropriate to thank you as the board?
We would love to, thank you.
Well, we know it was a hard year. I mean, obviously, with the changes, everybody was kind of blindsided.
It was, it's been amazing year. But I have to say, that optimism in me, as hard as it was going through a superintendent search in the spring, it failing, thank goodness we were able to convince Dr. Williams to stay out another year. But then this fall, the candidates were different, and Dr. Baker, she really rose to the top, and I'm just really thrilled and excited that she's coming. She has a really keen focus on equity, and she's not looking to move on from here. She's looking
to be here for 5 minutes.
Yeah, she's definitely, wanting to really have this be the last section of her career, right? And which is really exciting. And the neat thing is she's been visiting the district, and I've had the pleasure of, she's been visiting schools and all that kind of thing, but I've also had the pleasure to introduce her to community leaders. So we've been to places like Hope, we've been to places like United Way, and I'm not going to remember, Atria, Teen Center, and there's a whole list of others that we're still going. And her idea is, well, what are our kids struggling with, but also how can we partner? So it's just very inspiring for me, to participate in those. So I'm excited.
We're in the other kind of same, right? So I wanted to take a moment to thank Eddie Fallis, our student representative. This will be the last annual meeting he will attend because he's graduating. So I don't know you very well, personally, but I know I see you in the paper and on websites, and you're everywhere, and you've made time to bring your perspective to us. So thank you for adding us to your busy schedule. There were nights where I think you came directly from basketball practice, or were leaving to go to a game or something. So you could have easily just been like, whatever, I'm just gonna, but you make the time. And we have Sophia Lawton coming. She's already working with us, and she's a junior, right? And so you guys don't get to see her and meet her tonight, but while we're saying our thank yous and goodbyes, I know we'll have you for the rest of the school year, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to say thank you, and you've done a great job. So.
Yep. All gratitude is deeply appreciated. It should also be equally, if not more so, directed towards Matt Parente and Dr. Tim Williams and other administration staff who have navigated the choppiest waters that we've heard about, that we've experienced, have helped to educate us as board members, have found ways of communicating excruciatingly complicated information in the most straightforward way possible, and have remained incredibly calm under pressure, and really great partners. So I'm so grateful to you, and I really think that what we have in front of us is a strong budget that reflects, as much as anything, our incredibly strong leadership at the district.
Anything else anyone would like to bring up this evening? Well, if not, great discussion. That'll end our informational hearing, and be sure to vote next Tuesday. Adjourned.
Thank you. And thank you guys for coming out. Seriously.
Lots of rest. Married this way. 5 days.
It's all these pictures of, right?
Yes.